This podcast is brought to you by IronSight. The logistical complexity of oil and gas field operations can make it difficult to stay on top of who is doing what, where, and when. That's where IronSight comes in. And so IronSight connects E&Ps, midstream companies, and service providers so they can collaborate and coordinate with the field services and internal resources more efficiently. IronSight was designed to support everything from fluid hauling and hot shots to maintenance and trades, making it one of the most versatile field operations and logistics management tools on the market. How do they do it? Well, the secret sauce is, regardless of what type of service, every single job you need done is going to follow the same core workflow. Somebody requests a job, it gets scheduled, the job gets executed, what gets done is documented, and it's reviewed, approved, and the data and the documentation gets sent wherever it needs to go kind of from there. So IronSight has spent years perfecting their fit-for-purpose function, making their core workflow configurable to any field activity so that you can lower operating costs, reduce your risk, and be more effective across your entire field operation. So whether you work for an E&P, midstream company, or service provider, if you're managing field operations and logistics, you're going to want to take a look at IronSight. They were also the Energy Tech Night Midland winner a few years back. They've also been on the podcast in the past, good friends of ours, so go check them out. Visit ironsight.app/DW to learn if your company is eligible for a free 3-month trial. It's ironsight, SIGHT.app/DW. Click the link in the description and let them know that we sent you.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another week of the Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. Got a long time friend here in the studio with me today. We got the man, Justin, with PPG Energy. Real quick, tell me what PPG stands for, because the roughneck and means pounds per gallon. What does it actually stand for?
So the official abbreviation is Patriot Power Group, and we're actually relatively new. We've been around for probably since 2019, 2020, but mainly focused on oil and gas operations, electric frac, electrification of oil field facilities, and also large-scale utility plants. So we provide assets for oil field power generation, but we also provide a good core of our business is just servicing power plants, utilities, and anything else that provides power to either oil field facilities or main utility operations.
It's pretty interesting space to me because this is something that we've been creating content on for 2 or 3 years now. We went out to EQT and looked at an electric frac, and back then a lot of people were like, oh, this is a fad, this is stupid, and it's very overwhelmingly clear that it's not just a fad, that there's a lot of off-grid power generation happening in upstream oil and gas, but also in just other different industries and sectors as well. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that today. For you flew in here from Midland today. So we got I think you moved to Midland, you said in 2013. So you've been there for
10 years.
10 years now, man. You're officially a Midlander now. I know, you're official.
I think this is the longest I've ever stayed in any one location in my entire life.
Yeah.
So
that's wild. Yeah. So you moved there in 2013. That's like wild for me to think about that. I moved away 10 years ago. And so, what was your background before that? You just told me that you were, I think, a captain in the Army is what you said. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So prior to moving to Midland, I was in the Army. So I joined the Army out of college, enlisted in 2004, and actually joined the National Guard at the University of Oklahoma. So I was in the National Guard for a couple of years before I went on active duty.
Are you from Oklahoma?
I am, yeah.
Where at?
So I was born in Oklahoma City. My whole family's from there.
Nice.
Both my parents went to University of Oklahoma. So it's the only school that I applied to because I was focused more on college football when OU actually had a good track record in college football versus last year. But anyway, yeah, that's where I ended up. And I just, after I kind of made a deal with my parents after 9/11. I wanted to join the military. I've got a very strong military background on both sides of my family.
Yeah.
But they're like, look, they're pretty understanding about it. They're like, look, we understand your need to want to go fight, especially after 9/11. But we also, we want you to go to college and at least get some education under your belt. So kind of the trade-off was, I did ROTC, the National Guard, while I was in college, but then I went on active duty. So I went on active duty in 2007, and then was on active duty until I got out in 2013. So
nice. So you got out in 2013, get into the oil and gas business, move out to Midland. Did you get into power gen first when you moved there, or what got you into the oil industry?
So I was actually placed out there by a headhunter that was taking prior military officers and placing them in different jobs around the country.
Yeah.
And I had 2 offers on the table. One of them was for an electrical wholesaler in West Texas. The other one was actually for Kinder Morgan in Beaumont. And, both of the offers were about the same. And coming out of the military, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. And it really just came down to location. And I talked to a couple of friends of mine, and they're like, well, if we had our pick, we would live in Midland over Beaumont. And so that's I had nothing to do with the job. It was sheerly about location. And it kind of worked out better because I was trying to get close to my family who's still in Oklahoma at the time. And anyway, I started electrical wholesaling, and they wasn't exactly what I was looking for because I was really just kind of doing inside sales and helping to manage a warehouse. And, coming out of the military, it was just, I don't know, it just wasn't as much responsibility as I wanted.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking a job at Schlumberger after that, and then worked there for a couple of years, which, as big as Schlumberger is, the business group that I was working under was for pump jacks. So just, conventional rod lift.
Yeah.
And had a lot of ex-military guys in there. So it was kind of more in my wheelhouse. And then market dropped out in 2016, got laid off. And fortunately, I kind of saw the writing on the wall that they were going to do some massive layoffs, and started talking with another company that was doing turbine power generation in West Texas, using flare gas to create power, and was using some old Caterpillar Solar 10s and 20s that were like 1 to 2 megawatt gas turbines to feed power for production utilities or for production power. And I didn't know anything about power generation, but I knew what gas flaring was. I was like, well, this actually seems like a pretty cool idea to take wasted gas and turn it into electricity. And that's where I got my start. I mean, I was working as a field technician, just fixing gas turbines all over the state.
That's awesome. Yeah, these gas turbines, I saw my first one like in person a couple of years ago, and they're huge and so complex, right? It's, it's not like just like a regular generator. I mean, these things they're like jet engines. And so, I think what's interesting is, they were first like being looked at as like, okay, we can do these off-grid electric fracs. And there's a ton of potential cost savings there when you look at, just diesel savings. I don't know off the top of my head how many gallons of diesel a typical frac takes, but it takes a lot. I always used to joke around when I was drilling wells and fracking. I was like, this is kind of like a circular economy. Like, we use so much diesel to extract oil and then send it down to the refinery, process it, make more diesel just to come back to us. And so that was always intriguing to me. It was like the electric frac side, but then you start looking at like what can be built with like, microgrids out on leases. Like, hey, if you have a bunch of ESPs, you can start generating your own electricity. And, obviously Bitcoin mining is a growing asset that you see out on leases. So anyways, just this idea of making these little microgrids and distributed energy assets out on oil leases was super fascinating to me. For you guys now at PPG, obviously, I know you guys are doing some stuff in electric frac. I think that y'all are actually going for your first deployment with an EMP, which you can't talk about that yet. Maybe here in a couple of months, once the job goes successfully, we can talk about that more. Is that y'all's main focus? Is upstream oil and gas operations, or do y'all see other applications and industries that you're building into as well?
I guess it would depend on the type of asset that you're talking about. So we're primarily, our background is primarily aeroderivative gas turbines. So your General Electric's, Mitsubishi's, and so that has been our core business up until since we started, and that's what we're using for powering electric fracs right now. Now, these same gas turbines that we're using for electric fracs and other, large stationary oil and gas applications like compressor facilities that use an immense amount of power or require an immense amount of power, these are the same gas turbines that you're going to see all across the country and all across the world for utility applications or variations of them. So, your General Electric TM2500 or LM2500 or LM6000, we're throwing a lot of like acronyms and numbers out there, but these are all the same gas turbine power plants that you'll see on utilities all over the world. And so another part of our core business is maintaining those power plants. So we own some assets that we're using for electric frac, but there's a ton of these assets all over the world that just need operations and maintenance.
Service.
Yeah, and so that's a big part of our.
So y'all actually have a big service side to the business where y'all are maintaining and servicing these assets. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I'd love to dive a little bit more into the power generation side, like at for actual utilities, because this is something, you know, like I remember, I don't know, 2 years ago maybe, there's an HEB here in Houston, and everyone was talking about, you know, like they have this nat gas turbine apparently that you know, they built this little microgrid to where even if they lose grid power, electricity, they still have the ability to generate their own electricity. I've heard of hospitals, you know, moving towards these. And, you know, I've always seen like, you know, the big, just like typical generators, but do you see like other hospitals and stores and other, you know, just, I don't know if you call those like retail spaces, are they starting to move to larger generators like these and really think about, hey, how can we produce, you know, a lot of power, not just like back up to power the lights, but how can we actually power a facility? Is that kind of where things are moving towards? For
backup power generation, yeah, absolutely. You know, Winter Storm Uri, I think, was a prime example of that. And HEB is a really good case study of that, because HEB actually used to have just, I think, 1 megawatt diesel generators on standby outside their stores, and they switched over to nat gas, and you know, parked them there. And you can actually, I remember the one in Midland off the loop, they had a they had a diesel generator parked there. It was essentially just a tractor trailer size diesel generator.
Yeah. And
then they switched over to, I think, Enchanted Rock, and it's just I don't know, it's a 1 megawatt natural gas generator that they, you know, poured a concrete pad for, tied a natural gas line into there. So, I mean, it's a permanent fixture now. And I think they've done that throughout all their stores across Texas.
HEB is a pretty amazing company.
They
are. I mean, if you look at the supply chain logistics, like during Hurricane Harvey, I mean, running convoys in Houston, I mean, don't get me started on HEB. I mean, they're just an amazing operation in the first place.
Well, I read an article about them. I think they did they did a case study. It's like, okay, if an HEB location loses power for 24 hours, we're going to lose X amount of inventory. You know, however many, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it is, just due to spoilage. And so they ran the analytics to just, you know, purchase these generators, because they may have been leasing them before. I can't remember. I may be incorrect on that, but they ended up just, you know, pulling trigger and just retrofitting everything in their inventory to switch over to these natural gas generators, because in the long run, if they lose power, you know, just one store, I mean, the generator is going to pay for itself.
Yeah.
So, and you'll see these, I think I saw, there's a Walgreens or something in Midland I saw the other day that had one on it, and it was Target. Sorry. Target has one now. So, I mean, I think you're seeing these all over the country where people realize the value of having a natural gas generator as backup, and it's pretty easy to do versus having a diesel generator, because, I mean, diesel generator, you've got the fuel associated with it. You have to make sure that, you know, you're treating the fuel so it doesn't.
That's a hard part about diesel, is that especially, you know, if you look at a disaster zone like Hurricane Harvey, I mean, diesel supply goes to zero, right? And so it's hard sourcing the fuel. Whereas if you're just plumbing in natural gas, you know, that can be delivered all from around the state. And so, and then also, you know, just the maintenance on, you know, treating the fuel and making sure it's stable. You know, if you have a tank of diesel that's sitting there for a year, 2 years without it really cycling through, that becomes an issue as well. And so it's interesting to see where they're going from more, you know, from these, I call it more like a temporary diesel generator setup, to where it's like, no, we're actually going to, you know, put this thing on a slab, so the foundation for this has become a piece of permanent structure, and run some analysis on the cost benefits to it. And it's like, yeah, like you said, HEB loses, you know, an entire store full of inventory. It'll pay for itself. So it's a pretty interesting way of seeing like these distributed energy assets being built out. And even in the future, you know, say that HEB has excess power that it's generating and it's consuming less. Now having the ability to have like virtual power plants where it can send electricity, you know, to the surrounding area, back into the grid, whatever it may be, that enables some pretty cool stuff in the future.
It does. And that's where that's where you're seeing a lot of so, there's companies like ours that provide natural gas turbines or natural gas reciprocating engines for oil and gas applications. And there's, that's been part of our core business, but you're seeing companies like ours and others that are, look, we can actually make a good chunk of our revenue from placing standby generators out and, enrolling them in demand response programs to feed power back on the grid. And, whether we, use, flare gas to power that, linking up with an E&P where they, lease the generators from us and provide the maintenance, or they just own the asset and we provide the maintenance. There's a ton of applications for this, whether it's oil and gas or even for, a target or an HEB, like that generator that's, parked on, any HEB across the state. If they want to, they could, and they may have this in place already, but you can enroll these generators in demand response programs to feed power back on the grid in times of emergencies.
Yeah.
But there's, in Generac, for instance, they make that part of their core business. They've got generator banks all over the state, and they will, feed power. They'll have, 6 generators on a substation, and those generators may only run for, I don't know, an hour or two out of the year, depending on, when the demand response programs kick in. But that's their business, though. And that's, they make their investment back pretty dang quick when the price of power is upwards of, $4,000 or $5,000 a megawatt hour.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible. And, we're seeing a lot of that is stemming from, again, Winter Storm Uri from a couple of years ago, because it just, really highlighted some pretty key weaknesses in Texas.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. If you look at the Texas grid alone, and ERCOT, Texas is very unique in the fact that we have a ton of wind generation being built out, and solar as well. And I'm all for every source of energy, but I think that we may be building those out a little too aggressively and not investing enough capex in backup generation or battery storage. And so the problem is, with like wind, it's like nameplate capacity is up here, but in reality, most of the time they're not producing that. And so that opens up opportunities, like you were saying, with like Enchanted Rock, where they have an entire business model. It's like, hey, we're going to have these gen sets out here, and when there's peak demand, we'll fire them up and provide power. And so, this just, quickly changing dynamic in the grid and energy, and it opens up a ton of opportunity. And when you look at like the upstream oil and gas space, I think that, there's, I saw Matt Wilkes from ProFrac the other day. This wasn't the other day, it was like 8 months ago, but
close enough.
Yeah, he wrote this Twitter thread on just kind of breaking down the economics of electric frac versus conventional fracs and the cost savings there. And it's like pretty eye-opening. And I've always been kind of curious how it will scale on a commercial basis, because, it's easy for like EQT up in the Marcellus, because every pad is a gas pad, right? You just, run it through a compressor, and all of a sudden you have conditioned gas that you need to run for these. Whereas out in West Texas, you may not have the gas supply that you need, or maybe sour gas. I'm assuming for PPG, y'all systems don't handle sour gas. Is that a correct assumption?
The turbines can. So the turbines can handle sour gas up to a certain percentage, depending on which model of turbine that you're utilizing.
Okay.
I would say the weak link in the chain, in terms of like, from the gas coming off the wellhead going into the inlet on the gas turbine side, is your compression piece. If you have to compress the gas, there's compression out there that'll handle H2S, or if you have to. But, again, it costs more money because you have to, run all stainless and everything. Like it's not your, it's not your standard, reciprocating compressor that you just pull off the shelf. Like you have to put a couple more bucks in it to make it able to handle H2S.
Yeah.
If there's any gas conditioning to pull any liquids out, you have to make sure that can handle H2S. So the turbine itself, there's turbines out there that will take upwards of 5% H2S and burn all day long. Now their efficiencies are terrible, but the technology is there for it to work.
Yeah.
But honestly, we really don't encounter a lot of field gas situations anymore where we have to worry about H2S anything over above, maybe 0.5%.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's at least the pads that we're operating on, it's pretty negligible. And so we really don't have to worry about it.
Not that much of an issue.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, BETA, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX.
Yeah, I've seen like some of the doubts that I've heard of, especially like when it comes to Bitcoin mining, is that running gas through a generator instead of flaring it, like it's not any more efficient. Crusoe has some studies out there that say that, one, there's some misassumptions on flaring gas and how efficient it is at burning methane, and if you have a high efficiency generator, that you actually have less emissions. Do y'all have any information or thoughts on that? When you look at like saying, hey, we're going to reduce methane flaring and generate electricity, some people out there will say that's actually not any better for the environment. You're still combusting it and emitting. Do y'all have any information or thoughts on that? Because that's something like I'm constantly trying to learn about and see if there are actually efficiency gains when it comes to emissions from flaring versus running it through a genset.
So one of the very first jobs that I worked on, and I probably should name the operator, but they were actually...
Pick it up in your head.
Yeah.
Whoever you want it to be.
Let's just say they're in West Texas. We'll just leave it at that. So I was running a couple Caterpillar Solar gas turbines for some production leases for them, and just providing power for ESPs and pump jacks and stuff like that. They were actually inquiring if they could get more gas turbines to just burn the flare gas with, because they're more efficient at burning the flare gas and they burned it cleaner. Because the turbine,
oh, really?
Yeah, the turbine burns. I think the exhaust stack on it varies between 800 to 1,000 degrees, and so it burns a lot more efficiently than a flare because you're just burning at hotter temperatures. You're just moving a lot more air and a lot more volume through it. So it just burns at a higher temp.
Yeah.
But they didn't have a need for power. They're just like, can we just have more turbines to burn the flare gas? Because you're also burning more fuel too. We're on the smaller turbines, you're burning about, a few hundred MCF a day. Like, it's not a lot. But on some of the bigger turbines, like your 30 megawatt turbines that we're using for frac, you can burn upwards of 4 to 5 million a day.
Wow.
And so one operator actually was doing that because they had so much gas that they were producing. So they had one turbine providing power to the lease, and we're running a mixture of like production equipment and drilling rigs off this one turbine. And the other turbine was sitting there just spinning idly, just burning gas because they were producing so much.
Yeah.
But they weren't flaring as much.
Yeah.
So, and it was still burning it cleanly. Like, we were still doing emission stack tests on it.
Yeah.
And, we're meeting all the emissions requirements. I mean, they weren't in violation of doing anything. It was kind of, honestly, it's kind of a waste of a turbine because it wasn't providing any power, but they didn't have anywhere to send the power.
That's actually super intriguing. I hadn't thought about that if it is more efficient than flaring, like, hey, we'll take some of them and we don't care if it's actually producing electricity to go anywhere. It's just more efficient than the flare stack is.
This is a very, very expensive flare.
That's what I was going to say. The economics, maybe for some of your bigger operators, it makes sense just based on the ESG accounting that they have to go through. But, for your smaller operators, probably still makes sense to put out a cheap flare stack. But that's, but even that, you look at that and it's like, you have electricity generated there. Like, so if you're an E&P that's doing that and you're listening to this, like, get some Bitcoin miners out there, at least mine, make some money.
And so that's the thing. Like, I've been, I was trying to push Bitcoin mining to E&Ps probably since 2017. I think I was approached by a couple different smaller Bitcoin miners.
Yeah.
And, I met them somewhere out in Midland, told them I did power generation. I was using flare gas to generate power. It's like, how do we get Bitcoin miners out
Yeah.
I said, well, it's pretty easy. But once we started having the conversations with the E&Ps, they, the production engineers were all over it because there's a lot of younger production engineers that took an interest to Bitcoin. It's like, yes, it sounds great. Like, we would love to do this because we have a ton of flare gas. But once you take into account the royalties associated with that gas, a lot of these E&Ps couldn't figure out how to, because they didn't want to get paid in Bitcoin. They want to get paid in dollars. But then they're like, how do we tell the royalty owners of the gas we're using their gas to mine Bitcoin, and then how do we physically account for this and pay them back for the gas that we're using to mine Bitcoin with? And so it just kind of became a concept that they just didn't want to pursue any further because it was just so new to them. They just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those are the very early days of talking about Bitcoin mining. A lot of we just had our Empower conference last week, and you had Eric Mullins there, the CEO of Lime Rock, and Chuck and I, before last year's Empower, we went and sat down with Lime Rock and just educated them. I think they had 20 people from across Lime Rock there, and just telling them. And they said that the most valuable thing that we told them in that meeting was hey, you will get sued by your landowners, and that allowed them to go think through those things. And they ended up partnering up with Bitcoin miners to just sell the gas, so they're not actually mining internally, but they found out a solution to get rid of their flared gas. And so I think that those things are, getting worked out. And, not to go too deep down this hole, but it's you can figure out those things. I mean, pay spot price for, Henry Hub, nat gas here. And then if you want to, you start up a midstream company, and it's hey, midstream company's paying for the gas, and then they're mining with it. And so it's a completely different entity and operation. But also, I'm not a land and title attorney, so don't take my advice over the show for it. But no, you look at that, and I mean, you look at the opportunity set, one, by available technology, two, by younger engineers in these E&Ps, and that's what opens up the opportunity for electric fracs and microgrids and all of these different things. And so I don't know if you ever saw my video I did. I went to ST9's office, or their production factory, and looked at them making this electric frac, and I was like, man, these aren't just retrofitted conventional frac pumps and trucks anymore. I mean, these are built from scratch, built for purpose electric fracs, and I think that that's cool as hell. I remember being out on frac jobs back in 2011, 2012, and of course we had our conventional diesels, but then I remember frac fleets coming out that had gas turbines on them, and they were helicopter engines, and I mean just loud as shit, man, so loud, and people were trying new things, and I don't think that the turbines ever really took off too much, but the electric frac, I mean, people see the benefit of it. What blew my mind is electric drilling rigs, and how they were just pulling. They're no, I should just tie up to the grid and pull, because they don't have near the power draw that electric fracs have. And that blew my mind, coming from the old school diesel Kelly rigs that I worked on, to damn, we're just plugging this thing into the grid and running it on electricity. So it's a really exciting time. And also one thing that both oil and gas industry sees the benefit of it, and this is also something that's very good in the public's eye. And so you can go get your furthest left-leaning climate hawk people, and they love this initiative too.
Yeah, and it's going to get even more exciting in the next couple of years. I mean, like I said, we're doing our first electric frac off the grid next month. There's been a couple operators that have done it in West Texas, upwards of I think 20 megawatts off the utility. So it's very possible. It's very doable. I mean, there's people that have done it. It's, what I've been trying to preach to all of our customers, because I mainly deal with electrical engineers on the E&P side, because everything that falls under either, production drilling or frac still has to go through their electrical engineering group, especially with the amount of power that we're dealing with. And also, especially since we're talking about tying equipment back onto the grid. Yeah. There's going to be so much change, I think, that you're going to see on the planning side. So you take drilling, for instance, we've electrified a bunch of different rigs in West Texas using, it's a basic transformer skid that slides in between the generators and the VFT house. So you can electrify the drilling rig off the utility power. it's such a paradigm shift for these drillers because they're so used to using diesel generators, and they're not used in the electrical department within these E&Ps is not used to having to plan for electrical infrastructure build outs while they're still drilling. All that stuff usually comes, later in the production, like, after the hole's been drilled and fracked.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm seeing on my end is after, years and years and years of like preaching this to our customers, they're starting to build out their electrical infrastructure prior to drilling so they can run the drilling rigs off of it, so they can run the frac fleets off of it. And that way, once the frac's done, everything's already built, and you just, drop an ESP in the hole and start pumping.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You're actually seeing a shift in the planning where it's now shifting sooner, where these guys are like, as soon as we're building the pad in the lease, we're doing the electrical engineering instead of after, frac gets off and figuring out how we power our production equipment. So timelines are actually shifting up.
So the E&P that we're doing this electric frac off the utility for next month, I had a conversation with him a couple of days ago, and he had he said something pretty interesting to me when they were planning to build out all their line infrastructure and their substations. He's like, we're pretty much hanging sausage on the lines. And kind of what he meant by that is like the diameter of the wire that they're hanging to pull off these substations is so thick. That's what he meant by hanging sausage, because they are planning to build out, or they've already built out this infrastructure with the plan of running all their drilling rigs off the utility and their frac fleets off the utility. And so they've just beefed up all their electrical infrastructure to accommodate for it.
Yeah.
Because when I was asking him how much capacity that they had to run the frac fleet, say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, you're going to have enough power to run probably 2 fracs in this particular field that you're looking at. So they finally, like, and I'm not going to say I'm responsible for this, but I think they finally read the writing on the wall in terms of, what is coming down the pipe from drilling all the way through production, because it's not just your electric frac fleets and your electric drilling rigs. Gas lift compressors that were traditionally reciprocating engines are now switching over to electric. So there's so much electrical demand that's getting put on the grid. Everything's got to get changed to accommodate it.
I think the thing that's interesting to me is you build out all this infrastructure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the frac job consumes the majority of the power when looking at drilling or production. And so say you build out all this infrastructure to handle all of these frac jobs, but after you're done drilling and completing on that lease, it seems like you're going to have this huge capacity of power and don't really have a use for it because the production operations take such a small amount. Do you think that that's fair to assume, like, if you beef up all this power infrastructure, like, you're going to need it during the fracking operations, but then after that there may not be a need for it, so you're left with excess capacity?
I don't think so, because again, I think they're beefing up their infrastructure to accommodate just the change that they're seeing on the electrical side aside from the frac, like mainly electric gas lift.
Yeah.
So because these, your traditional gas lift compressor, a couple hundred horsepower, whatever it is, I'm just throwing a number out there, are getting replaced with these, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 horsepower gas lift compressors. And not only for gas lift, but also midstream compressor stations too. There's these massive electrical electrical motors that are getting put on compression stations, gas lift for production wells, even your SWDs. It's not uncommon to see an SWD that's upwards of a couple thousand horsepower.
Yeah,
all electric motors. And so I don't think they're going to have excess capacity. I think they have to build out this infrastructure to accommodate just for all the demand that they're going to have. Yeah. So they're not having to rebuild infrastructure 5 years from now. Yeah. So I like to see it as hopefully they're just planning for the future, because everything is just switching over to electric.
Yeah. No, it's super interesting to me. Just seeing this pretty big shift in the way that people are looking at power generation and electrifying everything. And I think that it's super cool. I wrote this Twitter thread a couple of years back, but I was like, if you're interested in climate tech and sustainability as like the biggest sustainability efforts over the next 10 to 20 years are kind of going to come within the oil and gas industry. And it's things like this, like electrifying operations and, really being able to drive down emissions on the pad, mitigate methane emissions from flaring, And, just you think about the process of transporting, producing diesel and the cost savings that come with that. And so what's cool about like oil and gas is the most capitalistic industry that you'll ever find, right? And so it's like, hey, if we can do something and we can make money on it, and at the same time, it has some good benefits related to emissions, and it's a win-win for everyone, right? And so, yeah, I think that you look at companies like Diamondback, for instance, who've done an amazing job cutting down their flared gas, and this is something that the oil and gas industry is just getting beat up on in the media. Anytime someone sees fire in the air, they're it's not the best optic. And so anyways, it's just cool seeing these like technological solutions come solve the problems and do it in a way that's economically favorable for the operators.
And I think what's also interesting too is, a couple of customers that I've talked with over the past year or so are actually looking at building their own power plants. So the problem you have with remote power generation or temporary power generation is you're limited on the amount of capacity you can put back on the grid. So Onshore, for instance, I think it's like 10 megawatts that you can sell back per meter. And that's it's a very bureaucratic red tape process to go through it. So, the winter storm Uri a couple of years ago, we had a bunch of gas turbines running in West Texas that were still operating because they were running on field gas. Well, we couldn't sell the power back in the utility because none of the interconnects were in place. And honestly, it's nobody's fault, but if those interconnects were in place, there's enough idle gas turbine power generation that we were running that had been idled because all the production facilities had shut down. We could have powered probably a good chunk of Midland that had lost power during the winter storm.
That's what I think so cool is like really the bottleneck is transmission and just getting power to places. And so that's what I was like, start seeing the opportunity in the future for, hey, we've got these assets that are sitting idle. They can generate power, get it into the grid, and power Midland, Odessa, get them power back up. So,
and that's what a lot of these E&Ps are looking to do, because a lot of them got screwed over on their power hedges. And so that's kind of where all this is stemming from, is like, what do we do to create what can we do to create our own power and not even sell it back to the grid? Because selling it back into the grid it's honestly, it's super easy to do.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's a very bureaucratic process to go through to get the interconnects and essentially all the paperwork in place to make it happen. So they're looking at ways to just build out their own power stations using their produced natural gas and build out their own microgrids that they own, not even going through a company like us to lease the power. They'll buy the gas turbine, build 100 megawatts of power and then create, because all they're doing right now is they're pulling gas out of the formation, compressing it, selling it, and then in turn they're buying the gas back.
Yeah.
And so, they're buying the gas back in the form of power that's generated from, wherever the nearest power station is. So why don't they just do it themselves?
No, that's what you're shortening the upstream, midstream, downstream cycle, right? You're bringing it just right there on location. So, hey, why are we putting a molecule in a pipeline, sending it to a peaker plant, and then buying the electricity back when we could just generate it here? And I think this also plays into something that I've talked about on previous podcasts. Actually, I just had Mush Khan on the show, and he's a manufacturing expert here in Houston, and we're just kind of jamming out on this whole thesis that manufacturing is coming back onshore. It's coming back from overseas, and it's going to happen in places like Texas, Mexico, and other parts of North America. And I actually think that they're going to co-locate with energy assets. If you look at manufacturing, a huge input to that is energy costs. And so you're going to start seeing them come out in places like West Texas and build these manufacturing facilities where they have access to cheap and reliable energy. And I think that this just plays into it. It's like you start building power plants out there on site. You could have, Tesla's battery factory out there, any other battery factory out there that are actually co-locating with energy assets. And so that's why all of this is super exciting to me, because I think that this whole Pandora's box is becoming open up on what can be done with distributed energy assets.
Yeah, it's a pretty phenomenal time to be in the power industry, because you're looking at a shift not just in Texas, all across the world, because you've got coal plants that are being shut in favor of switching over to either renewables or natural gas. Electric vehicle charging stations, which, you know, that's not as much of a demand on the grid as stuff like data centers, and just anything else that was traditionally powered by a, you know, diesel engine or anything like that is, you know, pushing to be switched over to natural gas.
Yeah.
Or just something that is driven by an electric motor. And so the demand that you're seeing on the grid across the world is it's peaked. And the problem that we're seeing now, just as a small oilfield service provider, is availability of gas turbines. I mean, I could probably count on one hand how many large gas turbines I know that are available within the state of Texas right now that are available for sale.
Yeah.
I could probably count on two hands. I can know how many are available TM2500s, you know, your 32 megawatt gas turbines that are available around the world for sale. Like that's how slim it is. You know, GE, Mitsubishi, Caterpillar, I mean, they're all recovering still from COVID, supply chain shortages. Yeah. And so everyone is demanding all these power generation assets, but there's not enough to go around. Yeah. And so, and it sucks for the electric frac industry. And that's what I keep having to tell anyone that's looking to get an electric frac fleet is, yeah, the electric frac fleets are probably going to be there in Q3, Q4 of this year from a handful of different pressure pumpers, but you're not going to have power for them. Yeah. And so, you know, me as just the sales guy, I'm like, you know, I'm trying not to like pester them too much about making a decision. It's like, guys, you're going to have a fleet without power generation assets if you don't make a decision soon.
Yeah. You know, it's something that saw in the Bitcoin mining space too, like PPG Energy, their whole secret sauce was like, we're finding old 70s Caterpillar generators and we rebuild the top ends up because you can't get, you know, just regular gen sets too. We're not even talking about, you know, these big turbines. And so, coming out of COVID, I mean, those are bullwhip effects that we're going to be dealing with for the next, 10, 20 years probably. Yeah. And so that's like stupid to think about that, you can count on two hands how many are available. So that's an extreme shortage.
Yeah.
But, this is all fascinating stuff to me. Maybe in a few months we can get out there to Midland and come see some of y'all's operations if things are going good with the pilots. But someone's listening to the show and they want to check you guys out. Does PPG have a website? Can they find you on LinkedIn? How can they reach out?
Yeah, so our website's ppgenergy.net.
See, PPG is hard to say.
It is.
That's how I botched it in the intro. Is it ppgenergy.net?
ppgenergy.net.
Okay, cool.
I'm on LinkedIn, Justin Littman. I think it should be probably pretty easy to find.
Cool. Yeah, we'll drop some links in the show notes to PPG's website and also to Justin's LinkedIn profile. He's a good dude, so reach out to him if you're in Midland. Take him out for a drink and learn about what's going on the power gen side, because it's pretty interesting stuff. So, dude, appreciate you making it to Houston and talking to us about this. This is all very fascinating stuff to me, and I'm excited to see where it all goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking forward to hopefully having you out next month to check out our first pump on the grids.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. So, guys, if you like this, guys and girls, I always say guys. I'm like, we have plenty of women that listen to the show too, I'm sure. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. Give us a review on Spotify and Apple. Also, check it out on YouTube. We got the video on YouTube. Seeing our YouTube videos going up. So shout out to everyone that watches us on video. We'll catch y'all on the next episode.